Okay, Aurelio and Brian, thanks very much. Well, it's great to be here to talk about this topic. Certainly, I think we could all agree it is timely. I first got interested in this back in 2016. I was working on a book called Home Attitude, which has since been published, about home automation, how to make your house smart. And I was telling a friend of mine in Florida about it, and he said, well, John, that sounds like it might be interesting to people, but I think what would be really interesting is election attitude. Why don't you write a book about how we vote in America? I said to my friend, I really don't know anything about that. I've been voting for 50 years, but I really know nothing about the system. He said, well, you like to do research and write, so you just Google around a little bit and you'll find it's a very juicy topic. And of course, that turned out to be quite an understatement. The book was published in 2016. I know there's a lot of questions that we all have, so I'm going to allow plenty of time for them. I'd like to start by talking about the big picture. What's the big picture here with regard to voting and internet voting? And secondly, I'll talk a little bit about why don't we have internet voting? If you ask any young child about it, a 10-year-old, they would say, well, of course it makes sense to have internet voting, but we don't have it. Why is that? And then third, I'd like to talk about ballots. And it's a deep subject, ballots. I'll just cover the waterfront of that. And then lastly, I'm going to describe what does internet voting mean, mobile voting? What is it? How does it work? Is it secure? Can we trust it? Is it verifiable? Is it secure and private? So let's start out with the big picture. And the big picture goes back to 2016 and also 2018, when, believe it or not, there were approximately 100 million people who could have voted but did not vote. 100 million. Now, what do I mean by could have voted? What I mean is that most of them were registered voters, and the ones that weren't were eligible to become registered, which could be very easy to do, depending on where you live. So 100 million people didn't vote. Why? Well, some people say, well, because they're just not meeting their responsibility as a citizen. They're lazy. They don't like either candidate. So, okay. Pew Research did a study and found that maybe 10%, maybe 15 at the outside of the 100 million fell into that category that I just described. So, okay, we only have 85 million that didn't vote. Now let's put that in perspective. I got an email yesterday from a friend of mine in Connecticut who was very concerned about an article he read coming from Colorado, where 12 people, deceased people, received an invitation to request a mail-in ballot. Now, Colorado's been at mail-in voting for a long time, and those 12 people should not have received an invitation to request a mail-in ballot. It was clearly a mistake. It was I would say, frankly, an IT mistake, where their process did not involve looking at the death certificate database. But it's 12 people. Yet let's compare that to the real problem, which is the 85 million people who could have voted that didn't vote. So why didn't they vote? These are 70 million of them were registered. They were registered to vote, ready to go, but they didn't vote. Why? Well, it's a long list. And I wrote about this in Election Attitude in some detail. But just to give you some examples, some people were intimidated by the weather, perhaps older people that in bad weather didn't want to stand in line for hours. There may be some people who were taking care of their kids or taking care of their parents, and it was just too inconvenient to go to the polls. In many cases, states have closed the traditional polling places that people have used for many years. Why? Because they cost money to maintain these polling places. And states reduced it by hundreds of locations, and many people who walked to the place where they've always voted found a sign on the door that said, "We don't do that anymore. The new place is at this other address that the person did not recognize, had no way to get to," etc. Then, of course, there were people who were overseas. Millions of people, registered voters, overseas. The military voter participation is single digit. Why? Very simply because they have learned over the years that it's an unreliable process to reach out to the place where they're registered, hopefully receive the ballot where they're on active duty in Afghanistan, fill it out, mail it, and cross their fingers. And they learned over the years that in many cases, that ballot never gets back to the voting place. And if it did get back to the voting place, there was a perception that that envelope wouldn't be opened unless there was a tie. So why do I bother to vote? And this is really terrible, in my opinion, being a veteran myself, but even if I wasn't a veteran, I mean, our military is over there protecting us, and yet they can't vote effectively. They're disenfranchised. So there's a long list of reasons why people could have voted but didn't. And it's not because they're lazy. It's because of an ancient system. So that's the first part of the big picture. There are many other reasons that I could talk about. Now, the other part of the big picture is, why is it that we don't have mobile voting? We know that technology is very advanced. We know that we have technology that has enabled us to put a robot on Mars and drive around and take pictures and drill holes in the surface and perform chemical analysis 100 million miles from home, but we can't make mobile voting work? Well, there basically are two strong opponents to mobile voting, and is the reason why we don't have it. Believe it or not, the strongest opponent are our computer science professors, and they compare mobile voting with the internet. They compare it to a perfect system we will never, ever have. They don't compare it to the paper-based system that we do have, which has a primary characteristic of disenfranchising huge numbers of people. And it's also not that accurate, as I'll get into in a moment about ballots. So this is the first point of resistance, and it is very significant. There's an organization in Virginia, it's called Verified Voting. It's a 501c9 nonprofit lobbying organization. They love to give speeches about the dangers of internet voting. They love to be called out as a consultant to explain to people why they shouldn't even talk about or even think about voting using the internet. And of course, they love to get quoted in the newspapers. I would have to say, candidly, there's a lot of ego involved in this type of resistance. The other resistance comes from the Secretaries of State. In our Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, is a provision that gives the ball for voting to the states. The states in turn delegate to the 3,100 counties that we have in America. And none of those Secretaries of State, of course, they're all attorneys, very smart people, I would say cautious people. They don't want to take risks. They don't want to be the first to have the Russians meddling in their election system. And so they are opposed. And I guess I should throw in a third category of opposition, which is politicians. It occurs in both parties to varying degrees, but many politicians believe, and some studies have suggested this is true, that if we had a lot more people voting, that incumbents would not get reelected so often. And so we have basically a huge front of resistance to mobile internet voting. Okay, now I'd like to talk a little bit about ballots. This is in the news every day. What I'm going to talk about is not what's in the news. In terms of fraud, in my research for Election Attitude, the book, I looked high and low for incidences of fraud. I found a lot of stories about fraud, a lot of stories. And guess what? Most of those stories emanated from some politician who had lost an election. Why would they have lost? It couldn't be them. They're obviously the best candidate. If they lost, it had to be fraud. And there are many, many famous stories following that line of thought. I do think that as we shift to larger proportion of voting by mail, there are opportunities for fraud. There's no question about it. Whether it's bribing postal workers, or whether it's coercion, or whether it's people with some money in their pocket that go visit those that may be vulnerable and encourage them to vote and even maybe help them to vote, or in extreme cases, even vote for them. So I do think there is a long-term exposure, but as of right now, the amount of fraud is trivial compared to that 100 million people who were disenfranchised. But there are other problems with fraud, with ballots that I am much more concerned about. And basically, this is because ballots are pieces of paper and they are processed by humans. And humans with pieces of paper make a lot of mistakes, even though there are many safeguards put in place. Now, maybe partly as a public service, but also to perhaps unveil why paper ballots are a problem, let me describe how this process actually works, or how it's supposed to work. So you request a ballot and you receive it, and you fill out the ballot. You put it inside of what is called a secrecy sleeve. Basically, it's a small envelope that just holds the ballot. And then you take that secrecy sleeve envelope and you put it in the return envelope, you seal it, and you sign it. And then you put it in the mailbox. When it gets to the other end, they open the envelope, they check the postmark to see if it is postmarked before whatever the date is, which is required for the election, for that ballot to count. And of course, all the states are different. Some it has to be postmarked by November 3rd. A number of states have passed laws to modify that, to give extra time after November 3rd for the postmark. After they check the postmark, they open the envelope. First, they record that the person who signed it has voted. They don't see the vote itself. They don't see that ballot. It's in a secrecy sleeve. So the person who is processing this envelope, they look at the signature and they compare it to the signature that's in the registration database. Now, I'll give you an example. I'm a registered independent voter in Florida. My full official name in the database, which in Florida is the DMV, the motor vehicle database, is John Russell Patrick. I never sign my name that way. I sign my name John R. Patrick, except when I vote absentee. Because if I don't sign it John Russell Patrick, it's going to be rejected. Assuming that the signature is right, and by the way, a lot of people forget to sign it, or people do what's called a slam. And a slam means that, in effect, the person doesn't want their actual signature, their official legible signature, they don't want that to be visible on the outside of an envelope. So they just go zoop. They call that a slam. So when the people in the precinct see that envelope with that signature on it, they reject it. They say this ballot doesn't count. Or if it doesn't exist at all, or if it doesn't agree with the database. Then the secrecy sleeve is separately given to other people who don't know who cast that ballot, and they actually record the ballot, generally by putting that ballot through a ballot reading machine. And there's a set of things that can go wrong with these machines and cause them not to properly count, but I'll bypass that for the moment. Now, when they actually fill out the ballot, they have a little oval. You wouldn't believe it, but thousands of people circle their choice. They put a check mark or they put an X. And it varies by state, but the percentage of the lead from the pencil or the ink from the pen that occupies that oval has to be at least 15% or that vote doesn't count. Charles Stewart at MIT did a study in 2015 of paper ballots as received by voting precincts, and he used various statistical analysis and concluded that 7.7 million ballots were rejected. And we're seeing that already this year, and we're not even to election day yet, where people are receiving ballots that were improperly printed. New York just had to reprint 100,000 ballots. So I could go on for a long time about problems with ballots. I'm not talking about fraud. I'm not talking about anything partisan. I'm talking about technology, the lack thereof. I mean, come on, can't we do better than that after 150 years? So now let me describe briefly what internet voting would be, or actually we should call it mobile voting, because that for most people, that's the way it would be done with their device like we all carry around. The supercomputers that we carry around, supercomputers they are. 200 times more powerful than the Seymour Cray's first supercomputer back in 1976. And it is amazing what we can do with these supercomputers. We do it every day, except for voting. Well, there are companies out there who see this opportunity and who have put a lot of money and effort and skills into developing technology to make it easy for people to vote. Votum is a company in Ohio. They started out with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they have processed now millions of votes using their mobile app for voting. Another startup in Boston called Votes, V-O-A-T-Z, has focused on state and local elections. They developed a process with the state of West Virginia for the overseas military. And the state went along with it. Secretary of State Mac Warner, a former colonel in the Marine Corps whose daughter is serving in Afghanistan, he thinks it's atrocious that we don't make it easy for military people overseas to vote. So they worked with Votes and they developed the system and they used it in the primary. And the results were great. The military people loved it. There were no security issues. The vote was accurate. Satisfaction from the voters was very high. The way it works simply is you make a request to the precinct, which you can do by email or through their website. Say, you know, I'd like to vote remotely with my mobile device. And the precinct will verify that this person exists, and then they will begin a process to make sure that person actually is who they say they are. And to do that, they send them a code which allows them to log into the voting system. And they then ask the voter to take a picture of their driver's license or other government approved identity. And then they take a selfie. And they upload the selfie and the picture of the driver's license. They upload that to the voting site. And the Votes technology uses very sophisticated algorithms to determine, is this person in this selfie the same person whose picture is on this driver license? And that's how they authenticate the person. Others use face print, face ID, finger ID. There are numerous ways that a person can be authenticated. Then they allow this person to vote. The ballot is cast. It's encrypted and stored in what's called the blockchain, which is a distributed database which is mostly known for use with cryptocurrencies. And that gives it a bad name because there have been a lot of issues with cryptocurrencies. Crypto exchanges have been broken into, but the blockchain itself, the underlying infrastructure where cryptocurrency information and votes would be stored, is very highly secure, encrypted, think scrambled. And so the votes are stored and across a distributed database. And if there's an irregularity of any kind that occurs, then it's rejected because all these distributed databases have to be in sync at all times, agreeing with this new vote or this new asset record or this new crypto transaction has been stored. If the voter wants to verify that their vote was received, they can go to the website and make a request. They'll receive an email with a QR code on it. They scan the QR code with their phone and they can actually see the vote. Nobody else can, but they can. So it is secure, it's private, it's verifiable, but think of the other things that this little supercomputer in our hands could do for people. You know, right now, the people who are blind, and there's about 1 million people who are completely blind, tens of millions who have some degree of visual impairment. Blind organizations in North Carolina and Texas are suing the states because both of those states do have a provision to enfranchise military overseas. And the blind people are saying, if you can do it for them, why can't you do it for me? Well, because it's not in the legislation. Well, put it in the legislation. That's what they're taking to court. And their argument is very solid. They're saying, look, I'm blind and you're giving me two choices. I can go to the polls and risk my health, or I can get somebody to help me fill out this ballot and give up my privacy. They're the two choices that you give me. Give me my supercomputer and let it talk to me. Let it tell me my choices. Let me say who I want to vote for and let it repeat. Or just expand the size of the text and give me some enhancement for my impairment. There's so many things that could be done. If you think back to the year 2000 in Palm Beach County, Florida, Bush and Gore were having quite an election event there, as you know. And in Palm Beach County, in that election, 19,285 people voted for Bush and for Gore. Both. They voted for both. How can you vote for both? Well, there was this ballot. It was called the butterfly ballot, and it involved punching out a Chad. This is where the term Chadology emanated from. And it didn't take very much cognitive impairment to get confused with the way that ballot worked and what to punch and how to punch it. And the result was these duplicative votes. Of course, all of those votes were thrown away. 19,285 votes. They're called undercounts. They were just thrown away. That could have made the difference in itself. I don't know which way it would have gone, but that's not my point. And so think about your iPhone. Think about when you're ordering a pair of shoes on Amazon and it says, pick your color. You have red, brown, or black. You click red, and then you click brown. When you click brown, the red goes away. You can't pick two things. It's not possible. And that's just an elementary capability of the technology to make it more accurate. By the way, ballots can be extremely confusing. In North Carolina, there was a case in the primary where one candidate of one party, I think it was the Democratic Party, the candidates were listed underneath of the instructions for the ballot at the bottom. And thousands of people didn't even know it was there. And so again, undercounts. So the computer scientists can say that mobile internet voting is not perfect. Do we think the system we have is perfect? I sure don't. So there are many advantages to be had. And I like to make one other point, and then I'm going to open it for questions. Right now, some people say to themselves, I wish I had a third choice. And one of the many, many benefits of internet voting is a new concept of voting called ranked choice voting. The state of Maine has adopted this. Many large cities have adopted it. My hope is that someday, while I'm still able to vote, that it will be adopted nationwide. And the way it works starts with an open primary, not two closed parties, but any number of parties. North Dakota, for example, has this, and you can pick 5 candidates in the primaries. You can pick 5 Republicans or 5 Democrats or 3 of one and 2 of the other. And then those 5 candidates become who you're going to vote for. But instead of just voting for this person or that person, you rank them. My first choice is this person, my second choice, my third choice, my fourth choice, my fifth choice. This is called ranked choice voting. So now they count the votes. They count the votes, and of course, it's almost a guarantee that nobody's going to get 50% of the vote. So what do you do about that? Well, what you do is you take the number, whoever came in 5th, you take that person's out. They're done. But the people who voted for that person in 5th place also had a second choice, a third choice, a fourth choice, a fifth choice. So then you take those choices and you roll them into the remaining ballots. And you roll, this is called an instant roll-up. It can be done instantly, of course, if you have internet voting, and this is done by computers. The dramatic impact of this is very actually subtle. Last night we had 2 candidates that were, really going at each other. With ranked choice voting, they wouldn't do that. And the reason they wouldn't do that, because they both would know that there's a good chance one of them is going to lose, and they might actually be able to win by picking up the second choice or third choice or fourth choice of other people who voted for the other person. So you don't want to trash that other person, because the people that were voting for them may actually turn out to be what enables you to win. So it's a beautiful concept, and it really strengthens democracy. It gives people more choice, and it makes people feel like, I really got to express myself in this democracy and state who I really think would be the best person for governor or mayor or whatever it might be. So let me stop there and use our remaining time for some questions. And you can unmute and ask a question, or you can just put it in the chat window. And you can just click and send a message to all participants, or just to me, however you want to do it. And I'm going to look, and I see we've got one message in chat already. And somebody said they liked the presentation. Thank you. I'm sure there are questions, though.
John, this is Brian. Do you think that the ranked choice voting, and I know that there are a number of states across the country that actually have, that will be voting on ranked choice in November, do you think that could ever eliminate the Electoral College?
It's possible. I didn't talk about the Electoral College, and I didn't say much about it in my book either. And the reason is because that would require a constitutional amendment. And if you look at the simple basic things that our Congress can't agree on, whether or not they should help people out of work who are in the food line, they can't agree on something so basic. What are the odds of them agreeing on redoing the Constitution? Whichever party is in the majority, I don't think it's going to change. There's plenty of arguments why it should change. There are some arguments for why it is the way it is, but I don't see it changing. Ranked choice voting would be difficult to also, because remember, the states have the ball. The federal government can't decide how voting is going to work. Well, they could decide if they could ever all agree, but it's, in my opinion, very unlikely. where do we stand today with mobile voting? What has been done? Well, this startup called Votes, as I mentioned, they used it in the primary for the military overseas voters, and they're extending it to people with disabilities. The county of Utah County has adopted Votes as well, again, for overseas and disabled voters. They've used it also in Denver, but frankly, it's not widespread. There are pilots here and there. When I wrote the book in 2016, I thought certainly maybe by 2018, optimistically, but certainly by 2020, we would have widespread use of mobile blockchain voting. We don't, because of the strong wave of objections and pressure against it, as I mentioned earlier. I think, frankly, the only way this is going to happen is through the grassroots. I watched a webinar week before last, and the county clerk in Utah County articulated why mobile blockchain voting is the obvious thing to do, how it could enfranchise the overseas voters, not just the military, but people who are expats working for companies overseas, and of course those who are disabled. And she was so articulate, and I said, oh geez, if we just had more people like her, this would accelerate, and we would be able to adopt this more quickly. But again, the resistance is so strong. Let's see here. Can we get your books on Amazon? You certainly can. And thanks for asking that. You can go to johnpatrick.com and you'll see my 5 books there twirling around on the homepage. You can pick one and click on it. And by the way, any book sales that occur today or tomorrow, I've pledged to the library that I will donate 100% of the proceeds from those book sales to the library. Libraries are great. By the way, one question somebody may ask is, well, what about people that don't have one of these little supercomputers or don't want one or have no computer? Well, yeah, there are people in that category, and how could they get help? And the answer is local libraries. Now, I haven't gotten that from all the local libraries, but I feel confident. Libraries do a lot for people other than loan books. And some offer medical screenings, blood pressure checks. People go to the library when they're out of work to try to find resources. People go to the library when it comes tax time and are not sure what to do or what resources are available. Many of us here probably say, oh, you can find everything on the web. Well, you can, but not everybody leans that way, and not everybody, believe it or not, has a computer. The library in Danbury, these guys do a fantastic job there. I went there to give a talk on a Sunday afternoon. The place was packed, and they have, I don't know, how many computers do you have there for people to use? Dozens, right?
I think we have about over 70.
400?
Oh, over 70.
Oh, over 70.
Yeah.
70 computers. Well, however many they were all busy. I can tell you that. So,
well, and also I should note, in addition to the physical computers that we have at the library, we also have iPads and Chromebooks that we loan out as well. So I'm not sure if that included, were those, I don't think those were included in your figure, Aurelio.
No, I think I'm very conservative. And but right now it's within that number, and also what Brian was saying, we do lend out Chromebooks and as well as iPads, and they're always out all the time. So we're very happy about that. Technology is certainly of great importance here in Danbury, and we look forward to helping our patrons with the future of mobile online voting. We would love to be a part of that once that gets established.
Okay, great. I guess since the question was asked about my books, I'll just briefly tell you what they are. The first book was called,
By the way, we do have John's books in circulation starting on Monday. So if any of you in the Danbury area would like to check out John's book on election attitude or his other books, they will be available for curbside pickup. Just go to danburylibrary.org, look up John R. Patrick, choose a book for curbside pickup, and you can pick it up in the next 3 days in our parking lot. You just give us a call and somebody will run out and hand you your book.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Aurelio. Yeah, the first book was called Net Attitude. There's a series of 6 books. They're all, I call it the Attitude series. And Net Attitude, of course, is about the internet and how it works in layman terms and what attitude it takes to really take advantage of it as an organization. And Health Attitude is my largest book and has the most research behind it. And that, of course, is about the American healthcare system and how it works and how it doesn't work and what to do about it. And Election Attitude, and then Home Attitude, how to make your house smart, home automation book, and then Robot Attitude, how robots and artificial intelligence can make our lives better. Okay, I see someone here. David wants to unmute. Let's see if I can unmute him. He wants.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, John, thank you for thought-provoking points. I think there are some assumptions that underlie your work and your outlook that ought to be brought out. First, let me just back up a little bit with respect to the Electoral College. You referred to Article 1, Section 4, which gives the manner and place and other things to the state legislatures. It's only by custom that we have a popular vote. And you could imagine a world in which the state legislatures take on some appointment of the electors on their own. So I think any comparison or any call to eliminate the Electoral College in favor of a popular vote is not supported by the Constitution. It's really by custom
right.
That a popular vote. The other thing is this idea of universal franchise, I think, is flawed because for those, first of all, the right to vote carries a corresponding civic obligation and duty to vote responsibly. Now, I know that the disenfranchisement has an ugly, sorry history, and I'm not, it's not in my thinking that we should have a citizenship test to vote. But one useful threshold for responsible voting is getting off your butt and getting out in person to go someplace to register. And then when it comes time to vote, going to a physical polling place. And there are, I'm a student, I regard myself as a student and practitioner of systems of controls over 40 years, not a computer scientist, but a computer practitioner. In-person voting is a marvelously, what should I say, secure or controlled environment that we seem to be going down a road of discarding the controls on elections and voting that gives us. Now, you called it an ancient system, and I realize there are lots of problems. Their bad ballot design is certainly one of them. But a polling place that's supervised, that excludes electioneering at that time, that is able to enforce affirmative ID, one-time voting. I think these are advantages. And the last thing I'd like to say is that your ideas for technology enablement of voting are good, and we certainly ought to use them, but we ought not to lose sight of the controls over voting and the idea that not voting is actually a vote. That's a person's choice, a legitimate one, and a reflection of civic obligation and civic duty forfeited.
Yeah, well, thank you, David. A lot of good points. I think the exact number I don't recall, it's in my book, but I think there are 22 countries that require that citizens vote. And if they don't vote, they get a fine. And there were a few states that it's a non-trivial fine, and one state or country rather actually will take your passport away from you if you don't vote. So there's that interesting point of view. But the only thing you said that makes me just a little bit uncomfortable, if I may, with all due respect, is the point, and I've heard many people make this point, people need to get off their butt and get down there to the poll. Well, a number of states are closing their polls, consolidating them. And the people that are impacted by that tend to be the disadvantaged people, people of color, people of tribes, people that they've been voting at the same place for a long, long time and they can't vote there any longer. So it's not such a pleasurable thing or an easy duty to fulfill for them to go drive or get a bus to go to some other polling place. And then let's remember that we have millions of people who are disabled. And, you know, we're all living longer. And so I'm 75 years old. I'm healthy, but a lot of people 75 years old aren't healthy. And in Wisconsin, they don't want to wait in line with bad weather for hours and hours. And you mentioned the poll, you know, it can be a thrilling experience. I mean, I've done it myself for 50 years. But, you know, in my book, I wrote about things that happen at polls. And it's not such a controlled environment as it should be. Fights break out. I sure hope that doesn't happen this time, but it has happened in the past. People who are poll workers, and I definitely want to make this point, that election workers are wonderful people. They are so dedicated. They work so hard. They want everybody to vote. They want every vote to count. But they're getting older, and they're not. There's no rush of young people to take their place, and so it is. I understand the point about the feeling of going there and casting my vote and getting that little sticker that says I voted. Yeah, I buy into that, but I don't think that my grandchildren will buy into that. And I have 6 of them, and I know they won't buy into it. But I appreciate your comments, and they're thoughtful. Thank you. Let's see.
Thank you.
Another question here, why are some politicians against electronic voting? Well, there are politicians that just don't want more people to vote. And if you make it easier to vote, it leads to the conclusion that more people will vote if it's easier. And in my list of reasons in the book for why these 100 million people didn't vote, there's a lot of reasons. And most of them revolve around convenience. It's not lazy, it's just, they'd like to fulfill their duty, but for various reasons, they weren't able to do so. I mean, why do we have an election on Tuesday, the first Tuesday after the first Monday? Well, I'll tell you why. Because of farmers. You know, the 150 years ago, with all deference to farmers who respected the Sabbath and had to travel on Monday to get to the polls, so we vote on Tuesday, and we still do. In France, they vote on Sunday. Guess which has a higher voter participation, the US or France? You know, our voter participation, I think we rank somewhere around 50th in the world out of developed countries. It's disgraceful, but it's understandable because of this ancient system that we have. So, you know, why do politicians not want more people to vote? Because they're afraid that they might not get reelected, or frankly, they think that if you make it easy, the wrong people will vote. And I get asked this all the time, 100 million people, they were all going to vote for Hillary. I said, how do you know that? I don't know who they were going to vote for, but whoever they were going to vote for, they should be able to vote. And whoever was not the recipient of those votes should pay attention to that huge number of people and what their point of view is. That's what democracy is supposed to be all about. So, yeah. Okay, I think another point made here from someone is Election Day should be a national holiday. Well, I think there is actually a bill pending right now for that, but yeah, I guess that would be okay. I'd rather see us make it easier to vote. Well, I think we addressed all the questions, and I appreciate them very
John?
much. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Jim Sheaf.
Yeah, hi, Jim.
The first time I heard this was when you first published Election Attitude at the Danbury Area Computer Society, and since then I've given copies of your book to Elizabeth Esty and Chris Murphy, and although I don't know, well, I gave them to aides, so I don't know if the copies actually reached the actual representatives, but I trying to get these ideas to people who can do more about it than just than what us talking.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Jim. I can tell you the person that could really do something about it is Denise Merrill, the Secretary of State in Connecticut. And I met her at the Ridgefield Playhouse during a performance of the Capitol Steps comedy group. And I had a stack of my books there on the table and signing them for people. And somebody introduced me to her and I said, "Oh, I'm so happy to meet you. Could I come to Hartford and talk to you about mobile voting?" She said, "Absolutely not." I mean, this strong opposition that I mentioned earlier from 3 different camps, it's not weak. They're dead set against it. In fact, the Association of Secretaries of State, this is an organization that includes all 50 Secretaries of State, they put out a paper, a letter, a very strong letter, discouraging anybody and everybody from even thinking about using the internet in any way for voting. It's fear. They don't understand that it could be done. And it's not perfect, but is the system we have perfect? That's the question that doesn't seem to get asked. So thanks for that support, Jim.
Yeah, no one wants to be the first state to fail.
Right, exactly.
No one, they can't get a lesson from the turtle who can't move without sticking his neck out. And, no one's willing to stick their neck out.
Right. Okay, well, our time is up, and I want to shout out I see a couple of people out there. Buck, I haven't seen you for many, many years. Thanks for dialing in. Ed, nice to see you. Yeah, great. Well, my thanks to the Danbury Library for their support of this event. And
Thank you, John, for participating and bringing us this wonderful presentation on this Wednesday evening, the last day in September. And I want to ask all of you who are participating, let's do that poll that we started from the beginning. Now let's end it after John's presentation. Now, raise your hand digitally if you can. Do you think that mobile voting is a good idea? Let's see if John persuaded you or not.
I can tell you in one of these other webinars that we did a couple of months ago, the vote at the beginning was 67%, which surprised me that it was that high. And at the end, it was 93%. So I guess there are some valid arguments that can be made.
Hey,
well,
John,
thanks
you got me worried. I filled out my absentee ballot today, put it in the mailbox this morning, and now I realized I never signed my middle name either. And I know that it's on my driver's license, so my ballot has gone in already without my middle name on it, so I don't know if it's going to count or not.
Well, you can call the county
Okay.
where you're registered. and tell them that this happened. They're, like I said, these people, they want everybody to be able to vote, and they want every vote to count. We had a case in the building where I live in Florida where ballots were sent out. A very, let's say, elderly person grabbed the ballot out of a mailbox of the wrong, the mail, the carrier put the ballot in the wrong mailbox.
Oh, okay.
And the person that got it filled it out and sent it in and basically voted for this other person. And they resolved it. So it's not like it's a once and done thing. And these ballots, you know, there are auditing procedures at the polls, and they do check the database of people who have moved. They check the database of people who have died. They check the database, the driver's DMV database. So it's not like, you know, you hear comments, you know, there's all these ballots out there and people are going to just fill it out for the other guy and send them in. No, it's not that simple.
Excuse my interrupting. I observed this process in the Schuylkill County vote in 1972 in the courthouse in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, which is also the home of Yingling Beer. And I was privileged to enter the courtroom where that was taking place. And I have to say, I thought the election officials, the clerks there, and there was a judge who was on call presiding. I thought they were lenient. They didn't have the strict look at the signature, you know, something that was close, and middle name I don't think was required. It was pretty lenient. And then when it came time to actually looking at the ballots, some of them were just appalling. I mean, obscenities scribbled over the entire ballot, you know, vote for what. And but when it came to a ballot that seemed sincerely attempted, they did their level best to interpret it and tally it up that way. That's just one data point, and that influenced my perspective. And I recall that, of course, in the election of 2000, and looking at those poor people doing that job in Florida.
Right.
But I hope that our absentee ballots likewise are similarly well treated.
Yeah, well, I hope so. It does vary by state and by county. I can tell you that. Okay, well, again, thank you very much to all.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Nice to you, and we'll do this again sometime.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks for
John.
joining us this evening.
Great job. Thank you, John.
Good job.